This is Cults versus Marketing, Session 5. If you're just joining us, this class is based on my new book called Hoodwinked, How Marketers Use the Same Tactics as Cults. And if you are just catching up, there's a playlist where you can follow along up into where we are now. Last time we talked about brand communities, which were the precursor to brand cults, which is what we're talking about today. We had also gone through what were the recruitment and retention tactics used by cults, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how marketers use those kinds of tactics. Brand communities came to be talked about in the early 2000s, and by 2005, marketers and others were starting to talk about brand cults. And back then, we only thought about a couple of companies or people as being cults. It was maybe Oprah or Apple or Harley Davidson. But it wasn't the broad swath of companies that we think of as brand cults now. Becoming a brand cult has become the Northstar for marketers. Part of the reason is brands don't know whether or not you're going to see advertising in the same way they knew when people sat down to watch primetime programming in the 1980s or 70s or before that people would see it. They don't know that we're going to see that now. So they have to make brands so important to us that they are part of who and what we are. This is why brands are embedded with values. So you think of something like Rare Beauty and mental health. Or you think of Savage by Fenty, which has a ethos of including everyone of every size, shape, color, and ability. Companies do this because there are other social and cultural institutions that used to play a larger factor in our identities. Things like attending a religious institution. Now, this is not to say that people aren't looking for meaning. They still are, but they aren't necessarily getting it from the church down the street. Or people found identification from the jobs that they did, but we no longer work for the same company for 30 years. And so brands came in to fill that void. Well, when it comes to millennials and certainly Gen Z, they only want to connect with brands that they know align with their values. We're certainly seeing this now with people walking away from Target. And nothing embodies this idea of cult brands more than something known as The Gathering. This is a Forbes top 5 marketing conference. It's incredibly expensive, and it's all about valorizing these brands, these products, and the people who turn them into cult brands. What's also really interesting is that if you go to their website, they call themselves The Gathering. But if you look at the URL, it's called The Cult Gathering. I'm going to read just 2 lines from the book because this is so important from this chapter, which is chapter 2 that we're reading. This is the concept to grasp. Our interactions with brands are not about physical products. They're about what we think and feel about the products beyond the physical attributes. They are about what hopes and dreams and voids we want products to fill. So you can begin to see here the parallel between what religion does and what brands do. They give us meaning and emotion, and because they're now brand cults, they provide community, very much the way that religions have. Let's get back to cults and how marketers use the same tactics as cults. One of the key things that happens is that because we are in the online space, we are being deceived and manipulated in a way that we don't understand. I give 2 examples here. One is Facebook's emotional contagion research, which they did, I guess, almost a decade ago now. And what they did for about 600,000 people, they manipulated their feed to show them things that were particularly negative or things that were particularly positive. And that impacted their emotions. So people who saw negative information, they posted more negative information. And the same was true for those who were giving positive information. The other example is Frances Haugen, who was the Facebook whistleblower. She was the one who released the information about Instagram, explaining how awful it was for teenage girls. The technology combined with the messages that we are receiving from the brands become very powerful and turn those brands into cults. We ended by talking about a specific brand cult, and in this case, it was CrossFit. And if you know anybody who is a CrossFitter, you know that there are very much cult aspects to this particular gym. One of the things is having a name that you call each other. You know each other as CrossFitters. That's one way to help create that community within the group. One of the things I found really interesting about CrossFit, which I hadn't known before, was that because it's franchised so it can be particularly targeted to different groups. So some are LGBTQ, some are women only, some are Christian CrossFit. Next week, we'll talk more about cult brands, and in particular, we'll be diving into the cult of higher education. As always, I drop the week's information in the syllabus on my blog. You can find it here. Hope to see you next week.